Every morning at 6, the man walked to the old bridge at the edge of town. He carried a tin cup of coffee and a newspaper folded under one arm. The bridge wasn't much, just rusted iron and cracked planks that moaned underfoot. But to him it was a place of quiet company. Below, the river moved slow and brown, curling around stones like it had done for 100 years. No one knew his name any more. Some said he was a retired railway worker. Others guessed he had been a soldier. Children called him Mr. Morning, because he was always there when the sun climbed over the water. He never minded the nickname. He only smiled and lifted his cup in greeting. For 30 years he'd walked that same path, even through the winters when frost bit through his coat and snow buried the railings. The townspeople stopped noticing after a while, until one morning he didn't come. The bench where he always sat was empty, and the river seemed strangely quiet. A week passed before anyone found the note, tucked beneath the cup he'd left behind. The paper was wrinkled and stained with coffee. It read, "I met her here in 1953. She dropped her hat in the river, and I jumped in after it. Every day since, I've been waiting for her laughter to come back on the wind." No one could remember who she was. The old records listed no wife, no family, no next of kin. But after that day, people began to leave flowers on the bridge, roses, daisies, even wildflowers picked from the roadside. It became a small ritual of the town, a quiet act of respect for a man who had loved so deeply that he turned memory into a daily devotion. Years later, a painter passing through captured the scene, the bridge, the flowers, and the empty bench, in a watercolor. He titled it "The Man Who Waited for Spring." The painting now hangs in the town's library, a reminder that sometimes love is not about being found, but about continuing to wait faithfully even when no one else remembers why. The war had already burned through 3 winters when Sergeant Elias König found the photograph. It was lying in the mud beneath the shattered wall of a farmhouse near the Ardennes. A black and white picture of a young woman standing on a bridge, her hair caught by the wind, smiling at something just out of frame. The edges were torn, the image smudged by rain, but her eyes seemed alive. For a moment, amidst the smoke and ruin, Elias forgot the sound of the guns. He slipped the picture into the pocket of his tunic. He didn't know why, only that it felt wrong to leave her face behind in the mud. Elias had been a railway worker before the war. He used to stand at the riverbank in his hometown of Koblenz, waiting for the morning trains to cross the bridge that linked the two halves of the city. The sound of iron on iron had been the rhythm of his life. When the Wehrmacht called his name in 1939, he told his mother he'd return as soon as the bridge still stood. She laughed, not knowing how far those words would carry. Now, 5 years later, he was far from home, crouched in a Belgian forest, clutching a photograph of a stranger. That night, as the snow began to fall, Elias wrote a letter to no one. "I don't know your name," he began, "but you remind me that there was once something gentle in this world. If I live, I'll find the bridge where you stood, and I'll remember how to be human again." He folded the note and slipped it behind the photograph. It was the first time he had written anything personal since the war began. In the following days, his unit pushed westward. The front shifted like a tide, swallowing villages, forests, and men alike. Elias carried the photo with him through every bombardment, every retreat. His comrades joked that he had found a guardian angel. Some teased, others envied him. But to Elias, the woman on the bridge wasn't an angel. She was a promise, a reminder that something, somewhere, was still untouched by fire. When the Americans counterattacked, his company was cut off. The radio died. Food ran out. For 6 days they hid in the ruins of an abbey while shells thundered over the hills. Each night, Elias stared at the photograph under the flickering light of a candle stub. In the darkness, the smile on her face seemed to change, at times calm, at times sorrowful, as if she too knew what it meant to wait. On the 7th day, the order came to withdraw. Only 14 men of the original 47 made it out. Elias limped through the snow, his boots stiff with frozen blood. Somewhere in the retreat, the photograph slipped from his pocket and was lost in the churned earth. He didn't realize it until hours later, when the guns had fallen silent, and all that remained was the sound of the wind moving through the trees. He sank to his knees in the snow and wept, not for his fallen comrades, not even for himself, but for the face he would never see again. That night he dreamed of a bridge bathed in sunlight and a woman standing there, waiting. When the war ended, the trains stopped running. The rails that had once carried steel and coal and men to the front now lay twisted across the landscape like broken ribs. The bridges that spanned Germany's rivers were gone, bombed by both sides, as if the sky itself wanted to erase every road that led back to yesterday. Elias König returned home on foot. He was thinner, slower, quieter than the man who had left 6 years before. He walked with a cane made from the branch of an apple tree, the bark still clinging to it. In his satchel he carried only a few things: a dented mess tin, a crumpled letter from his mother that he had never answered, and the memory of a photograph lost somewhere in Belgium. When he reached Koblenz, it was dusk. The city was a skeleton, the cathedral roof gone, the market square a crater. Only the river remained unchanged, flowing steadily past the ruins, indifferent to human grief. He found the place where the bridge had stood. There was nothing left but the stone foundations on either bank. The span itself had collapsed into the water, forming a jagged scar of concrete and rebar. Elias stood there for a long time. He thought of the woman in the photograph, of her smile, her wind-swept hair, and wondered if she too had lived to see the world fall apart. Maybe she was a wife waiting for a husband who never came home. Maybe she was a nurse, or a farmer's daughter, or no one at all, just a frozen moment captured before everything changed. He sat on the riverbank and opened his mother's letter. The ink had faded, but he could still read her words. "Elias, the trains have stopped running, but the river still sings. When you come home, meet me by the bridge. I'll be waiting." She had written it in 1944. By now, she was gone, another casualty of hunger and illness in the final months of the war. Elias folded the letter carefully and placed it back in his satchel. He felt the ache of years pressing down on him, all the faces, the voices, the unburied ghosts of men who had shared his rations and his fear. The war had ended, but its silence was heavier than the sound of the guns. That night he slept by the river. The wind carried the scent of spring and the faint clang of metal drifting from the factories that were slowly coming back to life. Somewhere across the water, a bell rang. He dreamed again of the bridge, but this time it was whole. The woman stood at its center, her back to him. When he called out, She turned, and it wasn't the stranger from the photograph anymore. It was his mother, smiling the way she used to when the morning trains crossed the river. When he woke, the sun was rising. He realized that the dream wasn't about returning to what had been lost. It was about learning to wait, not for people or promises, but for peace. In the years that followed, Elias rebuilt the bridge. He worked with the reconstruction crew, laying girders, hauling stone, driving bolts with hands that still shook from memory. It took 3 years to finish, and when the first train crossed in the spring of 1949, the townspeople gathered along the riverbanks to watch. Elias stood apart from them, leaning on his cane, his face lined but calm. As the locomotive rumbled overhead, he felt the vibration through the earth, the same rhythm that had once guided his life. That night he returned to the bridge alone. The moonlight shimmered on the water, and for a brief moment he thought he saw someone standing on the far side, a woman in a white dress, her hair caught by the wind. He didn't move. He only raised his hand, as if in greeting. The figure faded into the mist, and Elias whispered to the river, "I found the bridge. I kept my promise